Chapter 121. Hashtag grassy green, hashtag she's that new designer, right? I didn't expect that she would do such a thing. It turns out that masterpieces don't really reflect the real personality of the designer. I'm never buying Vena's jewelry anymore. A huge group of netizens started tagging Willow's Twitter and Facebook accounts in their comments and even started a hashtag to condemn her. Hashtag glazed onion, there's no need to explain anymore. There's so much concrete evidence, just deactivate your Facebook and Twitter account. Hashtag spicy food for life. You actually call yourself a jewelry designer? You're an insult to those jewelry designs. Hashtag sexy V. Isn't it funny? A designer who came up with a collection of jewelry that pays tribute to the Gothic design concept didn't even know designer Dila. I heard that she was able to come up with such perfect masterpieces after only a month of learning jewelry design. It's a bit outrageous, don't you think? I doubt those works have anything to do with her. At the Vanderbilt Manor, Willow was attacked by the netizens so much that she dared not look at her phone, and her mind was about to break down again. Layla walked up to her worriedly, picked up Willow's cell phone, went through the vicious comments, and asked anxiously, "How did this happen? Haven't you clarified it? I really didn't expect that Pearl would have the ability to let those goons push all the blame back to me. Damn it, Maisie Vanderbilt, that bitch is the person to be blamed. She should have been the one who got all the spotlight last night." Willow bit the nail of her thumb so hard that her nail was about to crack. The Santiago have now begun to suppress the Vanderbilts, and I was afraid that Dad would suspect me. That's why I chose to go public and clarify the matter. Now great, Pearl has actually turned the table and checkmated me. Damn, Maisie is the one to blame for all this, had it not been because Maisie had Nolan covering her ass. Would Pearl change her target and start to deal with me now? Since that bitch wants to rain fire and brimstone onto us, mother and daughter, it seems that we'll have to reveal our trump card now. Willow stared at her mother. What trump card do we have now? Layla explained smugly. Of course it's to push all the blame to Maisie, since she wants you to take the fall for the incident, then how can we not put up a fight and make her life a living hell too? Don't forget, how did the person in the lounge turn into Miss Santiago last night? Maisie must be the bitch who set up the whole thing. If that's the case, wouldn't Miss Santiago hate her too? So as long as we can push all the blame to Maisie, there's no way she can escape this. That bitch wants to witness from afar when my daughter and Miss Santiago fight each other to the death while she withdraws from this incident unscathed. Keep dreaming. In the evening, Nolan came to the 16th floor. Almost all the staff members on the 16th floor had gone off work, and only the office's lights were still on. He arrived outside Maisie's office, only to see Maisie lying on the desk asleep with a pen in her hand, and there were also a few unfinished drawings on the desk. Nolan walked up to her side, took the pen in her hand, put it away, and glanced down at the unsuspecting woman. She looks adorable only when she's asleep. He picked up Maisie horizontally while Maisie only turned her head and leaned in a comfortable position without showing any tendency of waking up. You do know how to sleep soundly in peace. A hint of helplessness flashed across the bottom of Nolan's eyes as he looked at the woman in his arms. Back at the Goldman mansion, Nolan was still carrying Maisie while he entered the door. The three Rugrats were sitting beside Mr. Goldman Sr. eating dinner, and they were all dumbfounded when they saw their mother coming in with their mother in his arms. One Nolan carried her upstairs. Colton wanted to catch up to them and have a look, but he was dragged back by Mr. Goldman Sr. You little rascal, why are you following them? Colton responded immediately, I'm going to see Daddy and Mommy. You'd be like the cat among the two pigeons if you were to join them now, Mr. Goldman Sr. said helplessly. Your father and mother need to spend some time alone, otherwise, how can your dad chase your mom? Yeah, Mommy still can't accept Daddy. Daisy nodded her head slightly. Chapter 122. Mr. Goldman Sr. looked at the three rascals. Then why doesn't your mother accept your father? The three rugrats stared at each other and then recounted to Mr. Goldman Sr. about their mother's experience. After listening to their explanation, Mr. Goldman Sr.'s expression turned a little gloomy. I didn't care about Maisie's background, but I only got to know that Maisie is one of the daughters of the Vanderbilts. Although the Vanderbilts are only a small family in Bassburg, the Goldman can still accept her as our daughter-in-law. What I didn't expect is that my idiot son had actually been blinded and deceived by the illegitimate daughter of the Vanderbilts for 6 years. No wonder Z is unwilling to accept my son. This kid deserves it. Grandpa, you do want mommy to be with daddy, right? Colton asked. Mr. Goldman Sr. snorted. Of course. My son has finally met a woman that he likes. There's no way that I'm breaking them up. In other words, the young lady is the only reason how my dumb son can find his true love. In the room, Nolan put Maisie on the bed. Maisie moaned a little when she got in contact with the soft bed, rolled over, and slept on his arm. Nolan frowned slightly. The soft sensation on the back of his hand made him feel tense, and a dim flame was faintly lit at the bottom of his eyes. This woman really cannot sleep soundly. Nolan leaned over and wanted to kiss her, but his phone rang abruptly. He glanced at Maisie, got up, and took out his cell phone to answer the call. A voice then sounded from the other end of the call. Mr. Goldman. I found some information about the matter that you asked me to investigate. Nolan looked back at Maisie, who had not woken up again, answered the phone, and left the room. He then entered the study. How did it go? I haven't been able to find out the relationship between Ms. Vanderbilt and the metropolis of Norwich, but the only clue that I discovered is that Ms. Vanderbilt's mother seemed to have quite a background. Sitting behind the desk, Nolan frowned. Her mother? Yes. I checked the information and compared it, only to find that Ms. Vanderbilt's mother might be from the De Arma. The other party quickly sent a piece of information to Nolan's computer, and Nolan received the file immediately. After opening the file, there were 2 comparative documents. The fingerprints of Stephen's original wife, Marina Gonzalez, were exactly the same as those of the daughter of the De Armas who had left home. Nolan's eyes dimmed a little. The De Armas. It's not that I don't know them. The De Arma was a noble family of Staslo. Their ancestors had served for the royal family and had been granted grandees and dukedom. However, after the incident with the eldest princess, the De Armas had withdrawn themselves from the royal politics in order to protect themselves, but the honor remained. Mr. Hernandez de Arma was the family's current patriarch, and Hernandez's eldest daughter, Larissa de Arma, was the mistress of the Lucas family, but his youngest daughter, Marina de Arma, had been missing since she left home more than 20 years ago. Nolan did not expect that Maisie's mother would turn out to be from the De Arma. At this time, Nolan received another email. He opened the email, and it contained a photo from more than 20 years ago. The woman in a black trench coat who was getting off a cruise ship is Marina de Arma, and the blonde man behind her. It's Erwin Lincoln. Later that night, Maisie gasped when she woke up. What the fuck is this? The man beside her was actually sleeping while bear hugging her. And she was so crushed that she could not move at all. Maisie moved his body and arms cautiously and waited until she felt a little more relieved to sit up slowly. The man behind her turned over and overturned her, staring fixedly at her with his gloomy eyes. You're awake? Can you get up first? Maisie's body stiffened for fear of what else he might do. Chapter 123. Maisie's hungry stomach sounded somewhat loud in the dead silent ambience. The man who was above her suddenly smirked. You finally feel hungry. I thought you could sleep till dawn. Maisie squinted her eyes and said, I'm glad that you know that. So get up now. Nolan got up from her body and rubbed her head. I'll cook you some supper. Maisie was astounded. What? Maisie went downstairs. She originally thought that she could sleep till the next morning too, but it was only 2 o'clock in the morning. This afternoon. She had been so tired that she did not even know how she came back home. Nolan served her supper in the kitchen, and Maisie glanced at the kitchen with a slightly startled expression. The tall man was standing in the kitchen in his home pajamas that looked loose and cozy, which made him look a little less sharp than when he was in his usual suit and leather shoes. But who would believe that the man in pajamas who was making her supper in the kitchen was actually Mr. Goldman? He then brought a bowl of ramen noodles to the table and specially prepared a mug of warm milk for her. Maisie walked to the dining table, sat down, and looked at the ramen in the bowl. The broth and noodles made by someone who's cooking ramen noodles for the first time will usually be sticky. But this is obviously not his first time. The soup was rich in color, while there were some diced tomatoes and ham, 2 fried eggs were placed on top to cover the noodles, and chopped green onions were sprinkled on top of everything to add more color to the dish. The presentation was really good. She grabbed the fork and picked up the ramen. There was no breakage or stickiness, the noodles were all still al dente. She raised her eyes to look at the man who was staring at her while resting his chin on his intertwined fingers. Mr. Goldman's cooking skills are quite top-notch, huh? To be honest, if I was the one who cooked this, I may not even be able to make it look so exquisite. The corners of Nolan's lips were raised slightly. I'm glad that you like it. Seeing that Maisie had eaten a mouthful, he squinted. How does it taste? Well, it's not bad. She took a few mouthfuls and mocked, I originally thought that Mr. Goldman's hands were only there to hold pens and sign contracts, but it seems that they've concealed their skills well. Speaking of concealment. Shouldn't you be the pro here? Maisie's action stopped for a split second before she raised her head and exchanged glances with Nolan. Me? Nolan propped up his chin, glanced at her, and nodded. Maisie lowered her head and continued to eat the noodles. You're quite a humorous man. There's nothing that I need to hide. He opened his lips indifferently. For example, your relationship with Erwin. Seeing that Nolan was asking about Uncle Erwin again, Maisie frowned. Do you really think it's weird for me to know Erwin? Is he planning to get to the bottom of this matter? Nolan leaned back slightly, squinting. Your mother and Erwin have known each other since a long time ago, haven't they? Maisie was astonished, and then her eyes turned sullen. Are you investigating me? You're the one who refused to tell me more, so I could only investigate it by myself. Nolan Goldman, you despicable skunk. Maisie gnashed her teeth. This bag has been investigating my affairs without my consent, Nolan chuckled helplessly. How am I despicable? I only want to get to know my woman, the biological mother of my children, better. Maisie was so angry that she wanted to fling the bowl at him. The word brazen was totally created for someone like him. In exchange, you tell me what I want to know. And I'll also tell you what you want to know about I don't want to know about you. Maisie's words came out of her mouth faster than they could be processed within her, which probably made the man upset. The man's eyes dimmed as he abruptly got up and walked toward her. What are you doing? Don't ahahahaha. The man tickled her on her waist with both hands. Maisie tried to evade by moving all around the place and wanted to escape his grasp, but she was being held in his arms. Chapter 124. Nolan held her in his arms and sat down on the chair. Now tell me. Maisie no longer had the strength to struggle and could not resist this man's various tricks. He actually did something so childish to force me to talk. She took a break to catch her breath and grabbed his hand for fear that he would tickle her again all of a sudden. I've known him since a long time ago, but I don't know the relationship between my mother and him. After all, how would I already know the one thing that I want to find out too? Nolan saw that she did not seem to be lying anymore, so his tightly pressed lips were slowly opened as he said, Don't you know his identity? I don't care what Uncle Erwin's identity is, anyway. He's the best relative that I could ask for besides my mother. Although they were not related by blood, she had already regarded Uncle Erwin as her relative, perhaps because he was the only person who could remember that her mother existed. Nolan's eyes drooped. Maisie did not seem to know about the metropolis, so she probably did not know that her mother was from the Dharma. I've told you all that I know, can I continue to eat my ramen? Nolan only smiled and let her go. Maisie waited for Nolan to get up before sitting back down and continuing to eat her ramen. Nolan looked at her. Grab some rest after finishing the noodles. He then went upstairs. Maisie turned her head, gazed at his back, and could not help but think for a moment. Could it be that he's found something? The next day, when Maisie arrived at the company, she saw several employees gathered together, discussing something. After seeing her, one of the female employees then subconsciously put away her cell phone. Ms. Zora, what's the matter? She smiled. Ms. Zora, it's the matter with Ms. Santiago. According to some posts on Facebook and Twitter, it has become related to you, the female clerk replied embarrassingly. Maisie took out her cell phone and took a look, only to realize that Willow had pushed all the blame onto her. Kennedy came over, so the staff members dismissed their short gossip session and went back to their respective workstations to work. Maisie then turned around and smiled. Uncle Kennedy. Have you scrolled through your Facebook or Twitter? Yeah, I just went through them. Willow has pushed all the blame on me. Maisie was still calm. Kennedy's eyebrows were creased. I think Willow has been driven into a corner and desperately wants to make things worse. You promised Mrs. Santiago to help Miss Santiago. But we'll put Miss Santiago in a very vulnerable position if we release that recording now. If we choose not to help the Santiago and release the recording now, everything will end right here and right now. He sighed as he did not understand why Maisie had to help the Santiago. Maisie smiled. Uncle Kennedy, helping the Santiago is just a way to curry favor with them. After all, the Santiago are also in the jewelry industry. I don't want to offend them and make another enemy. What's more, if Layla were to ask the Santiago to join forces with them again, it'd be very detrimental to us. Kennedy paused for a bit and suddenly smiled in embarrassment. It seems that I'm too narrow-minded. I didn't even think of this. Currying favor with the Santiago will make it easier for us when we run into them again in the future. If we were to drive the Santiago into a corner too, it would truly not be beneficial for Soul Jewelry's future development. How are you narrow-minded? You're just anxious, don't worry. Willow should have asked for my permission first, before she decided to point fingers at me. Maisie returned to her office, turned her laptop and logged into her Facebook and Twitter accounts. Willow knew how to evade the accusations while she was cruising around the posts and comment sessions. She then managed to talk a huge group of netizens into believing her words in just a few sentences. All these had to be credited to the photo that showed Pearl pushing Maisie and causing her to fall in public the other day. Chapter 125. Everyone believed that Pearl's offense was the beginning of Maisie's public revenge. The corners of Maisie's mouth twitched as she picked up the phone to call Mrs. Santiago. At about 10 a.m., Mrs. Santiago posted a video using Pearl's social media accounts. Pearl's condition looked very poor in the video, and her gaze was stupefied. She looked as if she had lost a lot of weight overnight, and there seemed to be a huge difference between her current self and the gorgeous selfies and photos that she usually uploaded onto her Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. The video was obviously her first online appearance after the incident. I was in a conflict with Ms. Vanderbilt, but it was not Ms. Vanderbilt who put me in harm's way. I was taken advantage of that night, which had caused me to believe in others' words too easily. I don't want to cover anything anymore, so I'm posting this video to apologize to everyone. #bruised cheeks. The actual victim has posted a video to clarify the whole incident. Wake up, you haters. Stop being brainwashed by the designer. #studied for nothing. She looks really haggard. To be honest, a young girl got ruined just like this, yet she has to be ridiculed by the public. I would surely kill the culprit behind the whole incident if she was my daughter. #SexyV, all of you are just a bunch of fucking haters. You guys are still trying to defend that woman. Too bad the evidence is too evident this time around. At the Vanderbilt matter, Stephen slammed the tablet on the table and pointed at Willow exasperatedly. Look at the things that you've done. Layla, who was standing on the side, was frightened. She then walked up to Stephen. Dear. Don't be angry, you get out of here. Stephen flung her hand away. Look at the daughter that you brought up, the Santiago. Are the Santiago some random family that she can trifle with? Stephen shouted at Layla. Layla bit her lip. It was obvious that she felt extremely aggrieved. Isn't it all because of that bitch, Maisie? Plus Willow never thought that Pearl would change her mind and side with Maisie. This must be that bitch's idea, it must be her. What does this have to do with Willie? Miss Santiago was the one who chose to believe in Willie when all Willie did was disclose some information to her very casually. Besides, Miss Santiago was originally going to harm Maisie. She was the one who's so incompetent that she got one up by Maisie. Layla subconsciously let the scheme slip her tongue. Seeing Stephen's gradually gloomy expression, Layla wanted to explain more, but that was when a backhand slap landed on her cheek. That slap almost sent Layla into the air. And she landed on the sofa. So, Z was your original target? Stephen could not believe it. Layla would always put on a kind stepmother front when he was around, and even Willow would have the appearance of an obedient daughter. But he did not expect that his current wife could say such a thing. Dear, I didn't mean that. Stephen ignored her but glared at Willow, whose face was slightly pale. So, is it true that you were the one who set Z up 6 years ago? Dad, I didn't. You have to believe me. Willow truly panicked. T mustn't be driven out of Vanderbilt's because of this, otherwise, I will have nothing left. Stephen. A stern and low voice came from upstairs as Madame Vanderbilt slowly walked downstairs with Linda. What are you doing? Why are you so furious? Mother, this is none of your concern. How can I not be concerned about this? Madame Vanderbilt took a glance at Layla, who had been slapped, and then looked at Willow. She's the woman that you insisted on marrying. And she's the daughter that you brought back to the Vanderbilts. And you're starting to feel upset about them now, she asked. Willow ran to Madame Vanderbilt and gave off an aggrieved look. Grandma, Madame Vanderbilt looked at Stephen with a troubled expression. Stephen, no matter what. Willie is still the daughter of the Vanderbilts and my granddaughter. The Vanderbilts still need to rely on her to climb up the social ladder. You've already driven one of your daughters out of the house. Do you plan to chase this daughter away too? Chapter 126. To Madame Vanderbilt, benefits always came first. The men would inherit the family business, and the women would marry someone with power and status to help the family. That was why she would protect Willow, because she had usage. Stephen held his fist. Mom. Isn't Maisie your granddaughter too? Maisie? Madame Vanderbilt's temper rose. She's exactly like her mother, always the outsider of the family. Why should I rely on her? Didn't you marry Marina because of how capable she was? Your place in Bassburg was sealed because of her. But did she respect me? She was immoral for thinking about another man when she was already married to you. The apple definitely doesn't fall far from the tree. Enough. Stephen's sudden outburst stunned everyone. Even Madame Vanderbilt looked at him like he was out of his mind. Her son had never yelled at her. You have no right to talk about Marina like that. Stephen stomped upstairs right after he said that. Layla, who still had her hand to her face, turned pale when she saw Stephen yell at his mother because of Marina. Stephen had not let go of Marina even years after her passing. That was why he wanted to revise his will. He was obviously trying to let Maisie inherit Vena. No, she wouldn't let that horrible woman take anything from her. Mom. We need to talk. Layla could only talk to Madame Vanderbilt since she would definitely not agree to leave Vena to Maisie. When Pearl's explanation video was posted, a lot of netizens sympathized with her. From her rude actions to being tricked. And with the statements by the few people involved, all the mistakes pointed toward the culprit, Willow. Even People's Daily of Bassburg made a statement supporting Pearl, indirectly criticizing Willow's actions and saying that she should lose her status as a renowned jewel designer. After the news came out, the loss that Vena suffered was devastating. Even clients who had pre-ordered jewelry from them requested refunds to avoid getting involved. Willow's fame had just started, but she became the most hated person in town before she could enjoy it. That was going to anger the Vanderbilts. Didn't expect Mrs. Santiago to be able to convince Miss Santiago to come out. This seems to be the nail on Willow's coffin. Unless Willow could show some proof. Maisie leaned back on her chair. Mrs. Santiago wants to clear her daughter's name. And I have evidence of her colluding with Willow. She would of course choose to help me. As for Willow, she probably never expected to be framed. If Willow was smart, she would accept it and be good until all this blew over. Of course. If she chose to go against Pearl and expose her plan with her, she would get into the bad books of the Santiago. She had no proof. The netizens would just be annoyed by her attempt to explain. However, Maisie didn't anticipate Willow's Twitter being suspended. It was obvious that Mrs. Santiago was behind it. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was Layla. Was this about Willow? Chapter 127. Maisie laid the phone down on the desk and turned on the speaker. Layla's voice floated out. Maisie, your grandma wants to see you. When the call ended, Kennedy was worried. Do you think Madame Vanderbilt wants to see you because they have some plan? Do you want me to go with you? Maisie smiled. No, Uncle Kennedy, there's a lot to be done at the studio. Madame Vanderbilt and Layla wouldn't be too much of a problem. Maisie arrived at Sunrise Restaurant. It was odd that Madame Vanderbilt and Layla hadn't asked her to return to the Vanderbilt Manor, but wanted to meet her here instead. What could be the reason? One, she saw Madame Vanderbilt and Layla sitting behind the table when she got into the room. Grandma. You asked to see me? Madame Vanderbilt wasn't happy at all, seeing that Maisie wasn't showing her respect and had a cold attitude. I heard that your father has transferred the ownership of Vena to you. Maisie paused, curious. Why didn't I know about that? Doesn't Vena belong to Willow now? She looked toward Layla while answering. Layla was quiet and looked at her with a complicated look. Was there a hint of resentment? Madame Vanderbilt scoffed and said, even though Vena is a company founded by your mother. It's under us Vanderbilts now. It belongs to us. You're just a woman, you'll marry one day, and Vena will be none of your business then. I won't agree if your father changed his will so that you inherit it. Madame Vanderbilt's speech surprised Maisie. What did she mean? Had her father changed his will so that Vena would go to her? How would that work? Maisie, I want you to give up on Vena. Madame Vanderbilt sounded like she was commanding Maisie to let go of Vena. Maisie's eyes turned dark. Grandma. I respect you, but don't forget that since Vena belongs to the Vanderbilts, it will have nothing to do with you as well. Vena now belonged to her father. It would be reasonable for him to decide who it went to. Her grandma, Madame Vanderbilt, would have no power in this. She had no right to ask her to give up on Vena. The Vanderbilt's elder. Madame Vanderbilt raised her voice. It doesn't matter, you still have no right. Maisie didn't show any mercy, and her attitude was clear that she would not give up. Madame Vanderbilt slammed the table. You can have Vena over my dead body. Layla wasn't expecting Madame Vanderbilt to be so worked up, but what she said reminded her of something. Madame Vanderbilt just wanted Vena. She wouldn't give it up to either Maisie or Willow. Layla was just using her to push Maisie back. When Maisie gave up, and when the old woman passed on, Vena would belong to her daughter. Maisie and Madame Vanderbilt stared at each other, their lips pressed tight. "You're threatening me with your death? But why do you think I would be affected by your passing? You really are exactly like your mother." Madame Vanderbilt sounded sarcastic, obviously unhappy with this attitude she shared with her mother. Maisie's face was sunken. "Too bad my mother passed too soon. Or else she might just have made you implode." "Maisie, is that how you speak to your elders?" Madame Vanderbilt's anger was at its peak. She almost threw a bowl on the table, but she held back when she remembered that she wasn't at home. Chapter 128. "I'll treat my elders how they treat me. You've never treated me as your granddaughter since I was a child anyway. Why do you think I should be nice?" Madame Vanderbilt had never seen nor carried her since her birth just because she was a girl. She had still been young and didn't understand much then. She would still return home for Thanksgiving with her parents. However, she had seen and remembered how Madame Vanderbilt treated her mother. Marina would be calm and not care much about Madame Vanderbilt. Maybe that was the reason Madame Vanderbilt thought that she was a lot like her mother. Maisie had been under the impression that her mother's coldness to the Vanderbilts was mainly due to her father's infidelity with Layla. How could you argue with your grandmother? Layla was still trying to stay in Madame Vanderbilt's good books and acted as the good daughter-in-law. "I'm just being honest." Maisie crossed her arms and said bluntly, "It's impossible for me to give Vena away, even if Dad didn't leave it to me. I'd still find a way to take it back. No one could stop her." "How dare you?" Madame Vanderbilt sneered. "Why wouldn't I dare?" Maisie said that in a resolute tone, turned around, and left. Right after she left, Madame Vanderbilt lost it and started shattering all the dishes on the table. Layla was startled but tried to console her. "Mother, don't be angry, we'll find a way to take care of her." Madame Vanderbilt calmed down after hearing what she said. "This girl really has Marina's blood, you're right. We'll find a way to take care of her." Maisie walked out of the restaurant, but she suddenly stopped at the car park, turned around, and looked at a Porsche in a flirty color. She looked at the license plate. Wasn't that Riley's car? Riley loved bright-colored cars, red, purple. And sometimes she would change them to green too. Maisie picked up her phone and called Riley, and it was picked up very quickly. "What's going on, are you at Sunrise?" Riley was stunned. She lowered her voice. "How did you know?" "T saw your car, why are you whispering?" "Are you meeting a man?" "No, Ms. Hill, we can talk another day if you're busy." "No, I'm not, there's no need to postpone it." Riley laughed dryly at the man sitting across from her and mumbled into the phone, "I'll explain later." She hung up. Maisie stood there. A man's voice? This girl. Was she forced to go on a blind date by her father again? At the Black Gold Group, Nolan walked out of the elevator. Before Quincy could react, Nolan bumped into a woman, but when he looked closely, it was his woman. Maisie hadn't been paying attention. She had been walking too quickly and hadn't seen him, so she walked into him. She was going to apologize, but when she saw that it was Nolan, she didn't feel like it anymore. Seeing her walking away when she saw that it was him, Nolan furrowed his brows, put out his arm, and blocked her. "Are we pretending to be strangers?" Maisie looked around and gnashed her teeth. "Mr. Goldman, this is the main hall, there are a lot of people around." The people coming and going were very busy, and the two of them were blocking the entrance to the elevator. Nolan's identity pretty much meant they were under the spotlight. People were looking over every now and then. Chapter 129. Nolan narrowed his eyes. "What are you afraid of? Everyone knows that you belong to me." He had made it public, so it wasn't possible they didn't know. Maisie pushed his hand away and said proudly, "Can you show me a little respect? Please?" She didn't want to walk around as Mr. Goldman's woman. Nolan's eyes turned dark. She didn't really mind how people thought. It was more like she didn't want to show affection in front of everyone. Why was she ashamed of him? Maisie noticed the weight of the arm and the possessiveness coming from his eyes, so her heart started pounding. Who knew if this man would kiss her in front of the crowd just to show them that she was his? That wouldn't be ideal. She changed her attitude from being proud to being shy. Even a little demure, and whispered, "We're in public, could you at least let me look respectable?" Nolan paused. He thought she didn't want to get close to him in public, but it turned out that she just wanted to look respectable. He scoffed. "All right, I'll buy that." He let go. Quincy was stunned. Was it that easy to convince Mr. Goldman? Maisie relaxed. As she was about to leave, she remembered something. Thus, she turned around and asked, "By the way, didn't you investigate if my mother was linked to Erwin? Did you find anything?" She had been thinking about that since the night before. Erwin wouldn't tell her, saying that it wasn't the right time, but she still wanted to learn more about her mother. Since Nolan had started looking into it, he might have learned something. Nolan's tight lips slowly opened upon seeing how much she wanted to know. "Come see me at my office in the afternoon." When afternoon came, Maisie went to his office. After knocking and getting permission to enter, she opened the door and saw Nolan sitting cross-legged on the couch, closing the document he was holding. He looked up at her. That handsome face, his thin lips were pressed together into a beautiful straight line. Maisie looked away. This man was too good-looking. Not only was he good-looking, but he was also a gangster in a suit. Upon recalling what she had seen that day, she started blushing. When her eyes met Nolan's, Maisie faked a cough and pretended to calmly walk to him. "Did you find anything?" Nolan passed the document he was holding to her. Maisie took the document and sat down to read it. Marina de Arma. Her mother was from the de Armas? Why had she changed it? Nolan kept his eyes on her. Her expression showed that she didn't know anything about her mother's past. That means that no one in the Vanderbilt family, including you, knew. Had the Vanderbilts known that Stephen's wife was Marina de Arma, they would have spread the news far and wide. They were related to nobles, after all. Maisie slowly said, I didn't know. But what does this have to do with her family name? Nolan switched on his laptop and showed her a page. Maisie saw the picture in the file. It was her younger mother getting off a yacht with Erwin, surrounded by bodyguards in black. Uncle Erwin and my mother, no way. Were Mom and Uncle Erwin in a relationship? Nolan suddenly appeared to be sitting next to her and said quietly, look closer. Chapter 130. Maisie took a good look at the picture and realized that Erwin and her mother were walking in a row, or rather, he was standing at the side behind her. However, it looked as though they were standing in a row because of the angle. If they were lovers, they would be more intimate. But Erwin and her mother didn't show any signs of intimacy. It even looked as though Erwin was respectful toward her. Who was her mother to Erwin? The laptop was suddenly pushed shut. Maisie turned to look at the man beside her, a little surprised. That was all you found? That was it? Nolan's long arm was resting on the back of the couch, behind where she sat. He leaned in. Kiss me, and I'll tell you. Never mind, I'll find out myself. Maisie was getting up to leave when Nolan pulled her into his arms. She sat down on his lap. That wasn't a good position to be in. Nolan, just because this is your office doesn't mean you can. Maisie pushed him lightly, but he was holding her tight against his chest with no signs of letting go. Seeing her turn red from anger, he slightly raised his brows. What are you trying to do? Let go. Maisie gnashed her teeth. Kiss me. Nolan was pretty much a prick, trying to take advantage of her. I don't dash. I'll kiss you then. The man didn't give her a chance to speak. His cold lips covered hers. And his hand was behind her head as though he was trying to eat her up. The fire in his eyes started burning. Maisie was concerned, but his kiss was too good. She was already out of breath, but she had finally lost her grip. She didn't even know how to struggle. So she just let him take over. His kiss lasted very long before he finally reluctantly released her. Maisie could finally breathe, but in her heart, her alarms were going off. She knew that if this went on, she would be devoured whole. Can you tell me now? She changed the subject. Nolan ran his finger across the corner of her lips, and then his eyes shifted. Your mother was from a noble family in Staslo. Maisie was still in a trance when she got back to her office. A noble of Staslo. Her mother had status. If her mother had been a noble. Then she had changed her name to Gonzalez to cover up so that the Vanderbilts didn't know who she was. That made sense. Had Madame Vanderbilt known that her mother was from a noble family, she wouldn't have treated her that horribly. But why did Mom come to Zlokova from Staslo? Does Uncle Erwin know something? Maisie arrived at Erwin's enormous private villa with an outdoor pool that night. They were playing chess in the living room while the bodyguards were watching from the side. Uncle Erwin. When will you tell me about my mother? Maisie looked up to see his expression. Erwin paused with a smile. Do you really want to know about your mother that badly? Maisie pursed her lips and made a move on the board. Is there anything that I can't know? Is it because of her status? Erwin slowly raised his head. Your mother had always wished that you could grow up happy and have a normal life. She always wanted to be a civilian. Maisie was stunned as she looked down. Your mother was born in a big family that had a high social standing in Staslo. They worked for the royals and were pretty much the inner circle, but when the royal family had an internal conflict, your mother's family left politics in order to keep the entire family safe.